Now, this question ends up being more involved than it looks like at first glance, but let's break it down. And I'm going to use units as much as possible to simplify and summarize what's happening here. So we know we have a mix of candied pecans as well as candied cashews. So let's use some meaningful variables here. Unfortunately, there's a lot of C's going on with candied and cashews. We'll keep C for cashews and we'll use P for pecans. But we want to be clear on what we're talking about for C and P. Are we talking about the price per pound or the number of pounds? Well, it depends. Let's check it out. So if the candied pecans are priced at $14 per pound, fun fact, the reason pound is LB comes from the Latin word libra, which is the same in Spanish. It means pound. So if ever you've wondered, why is there no P in the abbreviation, or where did the L and B come from? That's where it comes from. But anyway, I digress. So if it's $14 per pound, you can imagine you would have to multiply by however many pounds of pecans you get. Well, they do tell you that there's 8 pounds of candied pecans. So if you multiply by the 8 pounds, the pounds would cancel and you'd be left with the total price for those pecans. And we can multiply those. I like to treat this as 8 times 10 and 8 times 4, but obviously you can use your calculator. So we have 80 plus 32, which is $112 just for pecans. So it's pretty expensive. And then we also know that they're getting a certain amount of pounds of candied cashews. Now, I already mentioned we have to be clear on what do our variables really represent. Well, they help you out by saying, how many pounds of candied cashews? Well, we said we're going to use C for cashews, and it represents the number of pounds because that's what we're trying to find. How many pounds of cashews? So if we say, well, there's C pounds of cashews, which we don't know what C is, and those are priced at $10 per pound, by multiplying those, we will get the price for those cashews. So 10C plus 112, that represents the total price. So maybe I'll put T for total or P for price, either one. Now, the other thing that we know is the number of pounds, more or less. We know that there were 8 pounds of candied pecans. And remember, the C represented the number of pounds of candied cashews. So if you add the number of pounds of candied cashews to the number of pounds of candied pecans, which was 8, what are you going to do with that? Well, that represents the weight of the pecans. The only other information we know is that the cost is going to be $12.50 per pound. Well, remember, the C plus 8 is the number of pounds. So if we have the cost per pound, it would make perfect sense to multiply so that the pounds cancel, and as a result, this quantity would represent the total price. So that too would equal T. So we could say, and maybe even start to distribute it if we want, or just write it out if we decide to keep it as is, we have this as another equation for T. Well, if, as an example, 2 plus 3 equals 5, which it does, and 4 plus 1 equals 5, which it does, if two things are equal to the same thing, isn't it safe to say that those two values are equal to each other? Using that same reasoning, if 10C plus 112 and this quantity here, both of which are equal to T, wouldn't that mean that they're equal to each other? And then at this point, you could obviously solve, or you could just go into Desmos, type in the equation that at this point you would have on your scrap piece of paper. Now, instead of C, we're going to use X, but it means the same thing. And notice you find that the correct answer is 4.8 or 4.80.